Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to give you some feedback on some of the questions that appear in the 2018 exam paper. You will have sat section 1 of this paper thus far, and you'll have been asked to do some of these questions. Now, I'm going to specifically focus in on 2 of these questions. In the first part of the assessment, you are looking at the landscapes section, and those are 2 very typical questions that you'll have encountered. You obviously would always ignore question 2 because those are in topic areas that you will have not been taught as part of the course. Moving on to question 3, a very common exam question using a cross section on a map to identify 3 locations, as we can see here, A, B, and C. And you should find that these 2 grid reference points here and the length of this on the exam paper actually is the exact length when you find those 2 places on the map. So you should be able to line the x-axis of this graph along your cross-section, which should then very easily show you what A, B, and C are. In this case, A was the forestry, B was the Hallidale River, and C was an electricity transmission line. Right, moving on to the first of the 2 questions I want to look at. Now, this is a very common exam question. Key trick is you must select 2, because the question does say just 2, so you don't want to go talking about lots of them. There are some more obvious things to discuss. So, for example, farming is a fairly obvious one to pick up on. Tourism is also another relatively easy one to pick up on, as is renewable energy. Any point you make must be linked to some evidence from the map, and then you must explain why the evidence that you've given from the map is suited in this particular landscape. So why does the landscape suit the land use that you're identifying and the evidence that you're picking from the map? Now, what I want to look at is a variation of this question, which is possible conflicts between different land uses. So you're given those same land uses, but let's have a little think about what would be the conflict. So I'm scrolling down to the end of this exam paper because I want to go to the Ordnance Survey map that went with this exam. Now, if you do encounter this type of question about possible conflicts, you've got to think about the land uses that you've studied. You've got to think about the conflicts that you've studied and put those 2 bits of knowledge together. So if, for example, you are thinking about tourism, that there is a campsite here. Now, those campers will be creating wealth for the area, but however, they might also be having a party in the evening at the campsite or making a lot of noise in the local community that might disrupt the local community. And these are all houses in this little town of Melvich. They might also be arriving in cars, so there might be increased traffic on the A836, for example, so there would be another conflict. These people might also be coming to the area because they're planning on walking, so you might identify a track like we can see here. So they might be going for walks along through this landscape, but of course this is sheep farming, so that might disrupt the sheep, for example. They may be lying on the local beach down here, parking their car here. That might result in litter being left behind on the beach, which might also create a problem for local people. So that gives you an example of one possible conflict between, in this case, tourists and the local community. Well, let's think about another possible conflict. So it might be between the local community and farmers, who make up a lot of the local community, and renewable energies. So they might choose to be building a wind farm in this area, but this could be an area of sheep farming. So those 2 might be in conflict with each other. Likewise, a wind farm might disrupt local bird breeding patterns, which might also create a problem. They might choose to build a dam in this landscape and block up this loch system and create a larger big reservoir, which would be great for creating hydroelectric power. But then the ugly dam might be ugly and unattractive to people living in the local community. And it might also then mean there are less tourists arriving, which is going to mean that local businesses that rely on tourism, like the hotel, and you could give the good reference for the hotel, might suffer. So the key to this answer is thinking about the land uses, and you'll always be given those land uses from the table. And if I just zoom back out and show you the question, then thinking about those land users, thinking about the possible conflicts that are likely to happen. And you'll have learned about different conflicts that happen between different land users. And then lastly, using map evidence to support those conflicts. So it's not just saying there is farming and on this area happening and there is renewable energy happening and they could be in conflict, in it, writing it as a kind of an answer that you might be able to do, like farmers might be disrupted by wind turbines or hydro dams being built, but you need map evidence to support that potential conflict. So that's how you would access the marks. So that's question 4. Both the question you can see here, this example, but also a slight variation of that question. Let's have a little look at another question, which is also fairly difficult, probably one of the harder exams you like to encounter in the exam, which is a weather system that you're being given on a map, and this weather system is moving across that map, and you've got to not just describe the weather change, but you've got to explain those changes using evidence from the map. So let's explore how we would answer it and what the important points are. So the first thing to do when you encounter any synoptic weather map question is to write down on the side of your paper the 5 key things that you're going to want to explain. So these are, is there going to be a change in rainfall? Is there going to be a change in cloud cover? Is there going to be a change in wind speed? Is there going to be a change in wind direction? And is there going to be a change in temperature? Now, you're going to look to tell me about changes in those things and explain what's causing those changes. Right, the next thing to establish is, are we talking about low pressure or high pressure? Well, in this particular map, we can see that almost all of it, with the exception of this area down in southeast England, is experiencing low pressure. If there are weather fronts, as we can see on this map, then you need to look at what direction are they heading. Now, they quite conveniently show us an arrow that shows the path of the weather system. So what that means is the warm front, which I'm indicating here, and then behind it, the cold front, are moving in that direction. If we didn't get the arrow, then these little symbols are always pointing in the direction that the weather system is heading. So the little cold front here, the arrow's almost pointing in the way that the weather system is happening. So that would be a clue to what way it's working. Now we're asked, what's the weather going to do in Stirling over the next 24 hours? And we know that this weather system is moving across Stirling. At the moment, Stirling is in an area of cold air. Now, how do I know that? Because everywhere outside of a weather front that I'm indicating here is a cold air mass. Everywhere between the two weather fronts, what's known as the warm sector, is a warm air mass. So Stirling is starting off in cold air. Now, we're not getting any marks for telling anything about what Stirling is like at the moment, because the question is about what are the changes. And we're going to want to answer about the 5 things I identified at the start of this kind of answer. So the warm front's going to arrive first. So what are the key things that we can say about the warm front? Well, the arrival of the warm front will cause the temperature to rise because a warm front brings warm air. There will be clouds building up in the sky, and it'll start to drizzle, turning into steady rain, because that is what warm fronts do, steady rain. Okay. We can see the wind direction's not going to change because the isobar directions show that the wind's coming from the southwest to heading towards the northeast. Remember, winds travel in an anti-clockwise direction. So there's not any change yet in the wind direction. So let's not talk about that yet. But the wind speed, by the time we get to here, we'll notice the contours are a bit closer in this section than they are where Stirling currently sits. So as this is going to be what's going to be getting to Stirling soon, we could say that the winds will increase because the isobars are getting close together. Right. The temperature will then stay warmish because Stirling is now in the warm sector. There'll be intermittent rain with patches of cloud because that's what you get in the warm sector. But what we then want to say is the temperature is then going to drop because of the arrival of the cold front. Okay, so that's what I'm indicating there. That will get to Stirling in a few hours after the warm front. Now, what will also happen is we'll notice the isobars moving closer, so the wind will continue to increase. And we can actually see the wind direction is going to change because here we can see the wind's now coming from the west. And we would explain that because winds travel in an anti-clockwise direction following the isobars. So the wind's now coming from here rather than this direction. Okay, so that's the wind direction change discussed. Cold front also is going to bring heavy rain. So that's a significant change from the steady rain that we had with the warm front. and it's going to bring very large buildup of clouds because cold fronts have cumulonimbus clouds. So these are the very big storm clouds that you get. So just to review this answer, we've used the isobars to tell us about the wind speed changes and the wind direction changes. We've used the weather fronts to talk about the temperature changes, as well as the amount of rainfall, whether it's steady or heavy. And the weather fronts also tell us about clouds. Now, this is obviously a weather system right here that is getting the frontal rain. If we had high pressure down here, well, we wouldn't see weather fronts with high pressure, and therefore they would be experiencing different weather changes. So you have to kind of pay attention to what is your synoptic weather map. Right, so that's a review of the section 1 of the exam paper, of the questions that you will have been asked to do, and you'll be also asked to do under time conditions some practice questions for section 2.